Mr. City Manager, I believe we have some briefings. Would you like to announce them?
Yes, sir. Mayor, members of council, and staff and viewing public, we have a change to our schedule today. Delegate Davis has advised us that he was going to be unable to arrive in time to provide the cannabis oil legislation and development opportunities. And so we've been requested to move that to our next available meeting, and we'll coordinate schedules to allow that to occur. So with that as our opening act not being able to present today, we're going to go right into the city manager's briefings with your permission.
Please.
So as listed, our first briefing is our Deputy City Manager for Economic Vitality, Ron Williams, who will be providing you an entertainment district update.
Welcome, Ron.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. The last time we briefed this collectively was back in January. There's been significant progress in some areas, and we're here to update you on those. We're going to cover an infrastructure project, a new initiative that some of you may have engaged in, and then the three major projects that we've been briefing on the past year and a half, the entertainment district. The first one is Atlantic Avenue in the Vibe District. The 19th Street improvements are now underway, and citizens should start to see lane closures over the next week. And two lanes will be closed, and a lane in each direction will be open at all times. And typically what is unique for construction, we normally would not allow construction year-round, but we are doing this since it is a condensed corridor, and all the stakeholders and property owners in the area are aware of that. We've got a nice overlay here for you to understand what that infrastructure is going to look like from an aerial. And of course, as we may have mentioned to you before, the unique aspect of this streetscape is that because it is in the Vibe, it has included artwork from some of the murals or artists that you see in the district, and has also retained the 19th and Cypress theme that was painted there a couple years ago. So we're excited about this activity, and the artists will also have recognition and a stipend for their work that's incorporated in that. That's done with pavers that'll be permanent. A new initiative that we want to bring to your attention, because we're going to have some activities over the next couple months. I know some of you, Mr. Earn, Mr. Dyer, have engaged on some of this. But last year, towards the end of the summer, business owners and other stakeholders on Atlantic Avenue expressed concerns of a number of issues, including their perception of a decrease in pedestrian traffic. They had concerns about how the event programming had evolved, where it had been in the 90s. It started out with Beach Street USA, and they were asking for some tweaks in the programming, and then also parking. Soon thereafter, they officially formed the Atlantic Avenue Association, and it kind of complements their perspective with the Hotel Association and the Restaurant Association, bridges some of that, but also has predominantly a small retail and or a smaller restaurant perspective of the types of businesses that are along Atlantic Avenue. In response to the long list of items that they had identified in some ongoing meetings in August and September, we helped establish a workshop where we could use some of our consulting, on-call consulting firms to try to break down the different types of issues, and also to do some benchmarking on other oceanfront or beach-oriented towns, the type of entertainment and or mixed use or business districts that are in those areas. So from that workshop, we were able to glean a significant amount of information from the property owners and stakeholders, and then we set about to identify over the next 1 to 5 years, 1 to 3 years with earnest efforts, an action plan. One of those was to test out during the winter the idea of on-street parking. And so we did have a pilot program in February and March where we used the trolley lanes that weren't being used during the winter and allowed free on-street parking. There was good feedback on that, and we have a significant amount of survey and data from that we'll be working with the property owners and try to understand that. And collectively with the departments, most notably Public Works and the police, we believe that we can implement that again full-time in the off-season with support of everyone. We also worked on an effort to rebrand the Beat Street USA, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But to give you an idea of who some of the leadership is, again, the restaurants, landlords, club owners, hoteliers, and retailers. They recently, last month, elected a board of directors, and so they're really starting to solidify as a group and become major stakeholders. I'm going to let Brad give you an update about how we evolved this year that just kicked off this week, the Beat Street USA, very quickly.
Okay. Thank you, Ron. Mayor, members of council. As Ron was saying, there's been a lot of interest in Atlantic Avenue this year with the Atlantic Avenue Association, the desire to reinvent Atlantic Avenue, create it more of a relevant destination for not just visitors, but also for residents as well. And so one of the things that we heard about was from a lot of the businesses down on Atlantic Avenue was about the entertainment program. And so we wanted to bring new life to the entertainment program and really focus on the entertainment, more on music. We're adding different locations. We added several new locations where we're having musical entertainment. We've taken kind of some of the fun zone, what we call the fun zone activities, kind of more the children's activities, you know, the balloon caricatures, the face painting, the jugglers, and those sorts of activities that kids really still enjoy. We kind of focused that in the area, 19th and 20th Street, calling it and kind of branding it the Live in Atlantic Fun Zone. So really it's really kind of just really trying to bring more energy. The name Live on Atlantic is really to kind of emphasize, you know, the live aspect of entertainment performance, whether it's music or, you know, some of the children's programming, magicians and so forth, is really just kind of bring more energy to Atlantic Avenue, expand it into new locations where it hasn't been before, and really just kind of have, you know, from all the way from like 7th Street all the way to 34th Street, you just constantly, as you traverse the oceanfront, you're constantly, you know, experiencing live entertainment, live music, and fun activities for the family. So it's just a small thing as part of the overall, desire to really just kind of reinvigorate and reinvent Atlantic Avenue in the hopes of bringing more energy to the area and also attracting, you know, more foot traffic, bringing more local residents to the oceanfront as well.
So after our workshop last year, we committed that we would have a follow-up workshop to solidify an action plan. And leading up to that, just a couple weeks ago, leadership of the association requested a meeting and delivered to us 6 priorities that they'd like to see addressed. And they, similar themes: programming, branding, parking, placemaking, and infrastructure projects that they've asked us to look at. So we will be having that follow-up workshop, part 2, as we call it, on the 26th of June. We're going to do a walkabout in the morning with the group and identify between 15th and 25th Street those initiatives, again, that we can look at predominantly in a 1 to 3 year period. There is a significant amount of low-hanging fruit of some things that we can address within existing programming and existing funds. But the issues that will be addressed and that will come back to you with this report out really address branding and marketing. They've asked about consideration of incentives that could help them with different aspects of perhaps like a facade program, parking, placemaking, programming, and then that there are some areas that we do need to address: sidewalks and lighting and restrooms that we collectively as staff agree with those things that have been identified.
Mr. Mayor, if I could
Yes,
insert
John.
here, I would say, first off, I think this has been a really great exercise, and I would like to thank staff for jumping right on it and really having a lot of things come out very quickly, in my view. The one thing I did want to mention here is in terms of the on-street parking program and expanding that, is we just need to keep in mind that we need that lane currently for stacking for the Holiday Lights program. And so we've got to come up with some type of, if we're going to expand it into that period, we need to come up with some solution to be able to have the flow of traffic into the existing businesses and be able to stack everybody in queuing to get to the Holiday Lights. And we've seen how emotional everybody is for the Holiday Lights, so we want to keep both, but that's got to be on the radar. I don't know that we have a fix for that yet, but we're going to need one by the time we get there.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So the next one is the manager communicated to you last week, we have reached that major milestone with the completion of the work for the interim agreement. Have received our GMP and are proposing for your consideration the comprehensive agreement that's been posted for your vote on July 10th. I'm going to walk you through some of the design details that we've received and then close up with the funding for that. As a reminder, that one of the major first tasks was that we settled on what site it was going to go on, and that was across 19th Street from the Convention Center, adjacent to the BMP there, and that we did that activity in April. And at that point, we also decided to add the function of the track based on our analysis and recommendation of the CVB. This is what the site will look like in the landscaping plan. 1,100 surface parking spaces. We'll have a fence that will give a nice separation from Mount Olive Church here. We have a new BMP. There's significant stormwater requirements. This existing BMP is a wetlands bank, as I understand it, and has a liner, and so we can only use the existing outfalls. So to take the capacity that runs over in this area, we need to use that. The sports center itself sits at about 6.5 acres at 285,000 square feet, and it is oriented towards 19th Street. With an understanding that it's part of the convention center complex and the engagement between the two. We have strong pedestrian connections going through it, and we also have pedestrian connections coming down to 17th Street, and we'll look at restriping some of 17th Street to make sure we have pedestrian crossings and appropriate turn lanes as part of that. The elevations, we've got some more details on this, but this is the north elevation that faces 19th Street, the south on 17th, the west towards the parking lots, and then the east towards the east convention center parking lots. We will be working on some screening that you see here of all the HVAC. That will provide opportunity for either sponsorship, naming rights, or even art. In particular, this east elevation and the 17th Street south elevation, we're considering art complement where it sits adjacent to the Vibe District. What's nice is that it's not one homogeneous wall, that it has different roof lines and different elements, and with the metal panel that we're using, it gives that opportunity for variation there as well. This south elevation, there have been some concerns raised, but in these elevations, what you don't see is the landscaping that actually provides a buffer there and is required by our form-based code alternative compliance. So there is a loading dock here, but there will be significant landscaping, and appropriate landscaping for that. This is the latest rendering of it. Again, we're using a metal panel system that also has a nice system of a frosted glass that can offer indirect light into the venue, but also uses a system where you're not trying to marry up two different types of systems, such as a curtain wall or something like that. And so there's some cost savings, but also from construction standpoint and ongoing maintenance, it's nice that it's one manufacturer that has these two systems that work within the structure. Again, the floor layout, when we added the track, we were working on certification of both the International Association of Track and Field and the NCAA. We actually had representatives of U.S. Track and Field and NCAA over the past couple of weeks provide some input. Maybe, Brad, would you like to speak to that for a second?
Thank you again. This is a project that has so much excitement at so many different levels. It's really hard to encapsulate that for you right here, right now. But Nancy Hellman, who is in the room, represents our sports marketing team with her team. They've been out talking about the prospect of this facility with some of our clients for quite a while, and there's a tremendous amount of excitement from existing clients that are looking to expand their current programs that are in the market, as well as a lot of new clients that are excited about this opportunity. We wanted to make sure we got this right. We wanted to make sure that when we build this facility, that we build this facility to meet the needs of people that are hosting some of the major events. One of the more complex parts of this project is the track side, and the track and field events tend to be more complex in nature than, say, a volleyball tournament or a basketball tournament or wrestling meets and so forth. So in order to make sure that we were getting this right and doing it right, we brought some people to the table. We had several conference calls, and then we brought some people into town about 2 weeks ago, including Tracy Sunland, who's from San Diego. Tracy has a long history of Virginia Beach. He actually was the founder of Competitor Group, which is the founding organization of the Rock and Roll Half Marathon. And so he has a long history with Virginia Beach. He also is the founder of the New Balance Indoor Track Championships, the largest indoor track championship and track meet in the country. And so we had him here looking at this facility. We had Duffy Mahoney, who's from Indianapolis. Obviously, Indy is a hotbed for amateur sports. And Duffy is the chief for sport performance with U.S. Track and Field Association. He consults on track development all over the world, and he also is a consultant on managing track meets. So he's involved at the highest level. So if you turn on the television on a particular weekend, a Saturday or Sunday, and see a major track meet going on in NBC Sports, chances are Duffy's involved with it. So he is really an industry expert. We also had Tim Murphy, who's the director of construction with Bynum Sports. They are the company that installs the flooring system, the hydraulically banked oval that lifts up and down to a flattened track and a 12.2 degree raised ovals. He's personally been involved in the development of over 200 tracks in his career, so he really is an expert. But we had them here helping us understand how their meets function and how they would utilize this space in order to operate not only their meets, but any meets, any major significant meets. And they were very, very excited about this project. They really focused on what the flow of the events would be from when the athletes arrive, when they do their warm-ups, when they do their clerking in process, when they do their final warm-ups for their activity, and then after their activity, even the doping control system that they need to do and how that all would function. We really focused on the spacing and the dimensions of the facility, making sure there's enough room between the different events. Really talked about the technology needs, what we need in the facility in order to operate these meets at the level that they're talking about. And also they kind of educated us on some additional business opportunities of small things that we could do in the design of this facility that would give us tremendous business opportunities that we didn't even think about. So bringing these people to the table, really gave us some great insight on additional things that we can do in this facility with minimal additional effort that can bring us a lot of additional business to this facility. Basically, in summing it up, Tracy Sunland said, you really are building the cat's meow. He was really excited about this, and Duffy Mahoney, really said, if you build this, they will come. And they want to come as well. So we're really excited about it. It was great to have their participation in this process. They feel a sense of ownership in this facility right now, and they'll help us spread the word.
The additional square footage that we asked you for several weeks ago when you were at reconciliation predominantly was on revenue producing parts of the facility. In the food and beverage, we needed some more space. We also needed more openness in the front for ticketing, and then the opportunity for meeting rooms that can be rented for activities. I'm going to take you through a fly-through here in a minute, but just what you won't see in that is that this has a unique aspect in that underneath one side of the bleachers, which hold between 4,500 and 5,000 is seating on both sides. These are the warm-up lanes that Brad mentioned. We have the ability for hammer throw and have special fencing in that, discus and shot put. So all the activities of field. And yes, there's plenty of room, as I understand it. The outward bounds of that are 50% more than the world record, so we think we're pretty good on that. So this is a second mezzanine level that it has, and that gives you the opportunity to also get into some of the seating. So we're going to take you through a 2-minute fly-through of the building here real quick. So again, approaching from 19th Street, we want a nice plaza opportunity for any visitor to come outside, but also it offers that opportunity for small programming, small concerts, award ceremonies, perhaps professional athletes that might come do some signing. Gives us the opportunity to pull food trucks up onto the plaza. And so just a nice entryway. Because this facility is a ticketed facility, we do have access control, and that's where we'll be coming through right here at the beginning. In particular, when you have youth, you want to make sure that you have that there's good span and control of the building, and that, frankly, we've used it almost every square footage for either revenue producing or sports activities. There's not a whole lot of extra room. So these are all restrooms on the left, stairs that go up to the mezzanine. The sports marketing offices are right above this right here. This is the food and beverage area that straddles the two areas. Here you're looking out over the track. Again, we're aiming for NCAA championships to be in this facility. That's one of our goals. The additional offices and a significant amount of restrooms are all underneath those set of bleachers on the north side. And again, on the south side, we have warm-up lanes that are underneath that set. You'll see two nice meeting rooms that overlook, but also broadcasters and/or any type of event organizers can use during an event on this side. The nice thing about this court is that outside of track and field season, we can lay a number of courts over that. We can, at a minimum, put 4 to 6 basketball courts on the interior. You could also fit a football field, for example, if you had turf. Wrestling mats. I think the March wrestling tournament organizer said he can grow that tournament 50% in this building by being able to use the track side. This is the upper level mezzanine, food and beverage overlooking the courts. All of the baskets and volleyball nets for this side of the building will be hung from the ceiling, thereby eliminating the need for additional storage. And all in all, we believe that athletes and spectators alike will have really enjoy this building. So again, as we communicated, we came in at the 185,000 square feet, right at about $200 a square foot, which is more than it was. The convention center as a benchmark was around $450 a square foot, so it's a very basic building. It's just large at 6.5 acres. The parking, which was going to be part of the arena agreement and be built, is needed for this project, so we did add that. That's in the CIPs, and it's estimated that construction start for the site work and clearing would be in August, with a final completion with the building shakedown that have already occurred by November of 2020. Now, the CIPs that we had for the Central Beach and Convention District parking, when we're in reconciliation and we moved the additional square footage, that CIP had been at 10 and it put it at 7. And so we're recommending, in order to cover the necessary amount, that we have another ordinance when we do the comprehensive agreement ordinance in July to transfer from the dome site entertainment venue to the parking in order to cover that for now. It's a matter of timing. There's not additional appropriation per se. It's just in between two different projects of when the money is actually needed. So the dome site in year 2 would recoup that, and then the amount would not be $45 million in the second. For the remainder of the parking, and be about 41.5. So that's a recommendation that we're putting towards you, that we would have an ordinance for prior to the comprehensive agreement vote on July 10th. Comments or questions on this project?
Anybody have any questions or comments? John?
During the budget reconciliation, I went back and looked at the memo, and it did identify the $3 million increment. But nowhere, and I watched the video twice just to make sure I didn't miss anything or any other communications, but nowhere in there when we took the $3 million for that site was there any public disclosure that we now had an unexecutable CIP program, and that in fact we would be asked, even just after the budget was adopted, to go back and amend the CIP. So I understand why you're doing it, but clearly there was a lack of transparency, because I think that was a material omission. I think there might have been some robust debate had we known that we were adopting an unexecutable program at the start. So I really want to have a little bit more explanation on that, and I hope in the future that when we're making adjustments that make a CIP project unexecutable, and we willingly know that would be materially disclosed, so we could talk about it. We might in the end say yes, but I don't think anyone at the time looking through that sheet, we took money from a lot of places, maybe somebody on this table knew that, consciously knew that in the end, we didn't make $3 million go away. We were just postponing when we pay it, and that we're going to come back and rebalance. Not saying that we shouldn't. I'm just saying that we never had an opportunity to discuss it, and now we're discussing it after the budget's been adopted. And I just think that didn't do justice to us as decision makers, because I certainly would have approached that discussion differently than I have to now, and that choice was taken away.
Yes, John?
Well, the money's still the same, right? It's just a matter of which project you're spending it in and which year, is that correct?
Right, and we received the GMP on June 4th. which was, you know, and
The
not being.
amount, the amount that we're spending on parking and the amount that we're spending in total, I mean, in terms of the year of execution has changed, but I mean, the total amount's the same for both projects, the parking and the field house, or the sports center, right?
Yes.
That's not true.
But within the CIPs, not the sports center, the dome site and the parking would remain the
We always
same.
knew we were gonna spend 10 million on parking, surface parking, associated with what we were gonna be taking
I wouldn't say
away.
we always knew that. I thought we had adjusted it downward and didn't need $10 million. That was my take.
Still in the whole CIP, it was just a different year, correct? I mean, it's still in the CIP.
No, we
The full-
modified the CIP when we voted. That's the point I'm making. They reduced the amount of money. I read that as they reduced the requirement.
We have a CIP project for resort.
It wasn't
parking.
our, anyway, we didn't recommend to reduce it, it just, that's where it was adjusted at that time. We did get the final GMP in June.
But if I asked for the CIP today that we voted on and approved, it wouldn't show $10 million.
Correct.
Right.
It shows 7.
Correct.
And that would be a reduction in requirement unless someone tells you otherwise. That's how you would read that. I'm just saying it wasn't full disclosure is all I'm saying.
We created, if I may, Mr. Mayor, we created a CIP for Central Resort parking. We needed an additional sum, that was the transfer from the parking CIP to the sports center so that we could have sufficient funds to move forward with a now $58 million facility. We never knew, nor did we actually get the design work done till after the budget was really approved to take a look at what that parking was going to be in the, for the surface parking as we reoriented the building and selected that sometime in that April timeframe to orient towards the northwest. We did not know the costs associated with stormwater and the LED parking or LED lighting, nor did we understand all the conduit that's going to be associated with the camera system that needs to provide the public safety. So, we are trying to be transparent, Mr. Moss, and tell you these are the most recent numbers that we have. We're trying to execute a project that delivers a world-class facility that will provide all the requirements that NCAA and AAU sports and high school sports are going to require to use this facility. These numbers are just now to the point where we can bring forth a guaranteed maximum price so that we can deliver this project. And so we're not hiding anything here. We're as we are discovering through 15 to 20% design and getting material provider quotes through our preferred contractor, which we followed the PPA process to get a competitive environment to do this. We have an opportunity to execute a project and to move into construction and to live within the means that we have established in the 2 CIPs, the Sports Center and the Central Resort Parking Area, CIP.
Ben?
I was just going to commend Manager Hanson and Deputy City Manager Ron Williams. My recollection of the conversation was that we tasked the staff to go out and build us a world-class facility. I think that by any stretch, this is a world-class facility that's going to attract national attention, and so I would commend you. I'm very excited about this project. I think everybody around the table is. Very well done.
All right, anybody else?
I have one last remark to make. In the future, I would hope, when we know that we have a cost estimate that we can't rely upon to be the final, that the description in the CIP identifies all the uncertainty risks which are not yet accounted for, and then the contingency for the project should reflect that. But I think it points out once again the problem you have when you don't first build a very mature design. And I've shared my thoughts with that city manager. When you get to 85% of design maturity, then you can more responsibly understand the price so that when decision makers are making a decision, which is resources, they have a much better refined cost estimate and they have much less political capital they have to expend in explaining continued cost growth on a project that started at 40 million plus the parking, and then moves on. And so I think this is where design build leaves us short. Because it's predicated to get speed, you have less certainty to get speed of design and deliver the product. But results show the higher your design maturity, the better your price estimate, the better your competitive bids, and makes you able to get fixed price and better value. And that is the record, you know, and that's, so there is a cost for speed, and we are seeing this cost for speed here today in continually growing requirements for valid purposes.
And there's an opportunity cost for lack of speed
Yes.
also.
Yes, but there is. But I'm telling you, we're the public's money, and when I vote for something, I like to think I know what I'm voting for, and I didn't vote for. World class could be 2 billion. Would we be here voting for that? No, we would not. So my question is, class has a price, and I'd just like to be better informed on the risk between the price I see and the price that I might expect. Because that's what the public's, I don't know if they're asking you, but that's what they're asking me is, where'd all this cost growth come? Some I can explain because it was in there from the start, not well publicized per se by us, maybe as council members, but in there. Others, this is really cost growth and moving money around, which has to be replaced in out years of the fit up. Not in this year's budget, but in out year's budget, that $3.5 million either has to be offset by cost reduction at the dome site or has to be replaced. So it is a net cost growth over the life cycle of both developments. And that is just a true accounting. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Henley.
Did you say that this is now at 30% design?
15%.
It's, okay, it's at 15% design.
Yes,
now.
ma'am. So they agreed to a guaranteed maximum price of 15%.
Okay, because of the guarantee. But, you know, we run into this 30% design is kind of a magic design amount, particularly for roads and that kind of thing. So, you know, when you go out with these road hearings and people see this big design and everything, we have to remind everybody, well, this is just 30% design, but we run into the same thing. And we know that as things get better refined, it's going to change one way or the other. So it's just one of those things we have to bear up.
And
Say
it's
this is at 15%
similar to, but different.
price.
They've agreed to a guaranteed maximum price. We do have contingency for any owner requests, but unlike the Animal Care Center, for example, which was 100% design, and now you have an ordinance where you'll have additional allocation that you need to put towards it in order to get based on the bids. This is, we understand our risk here. They've assumed a significant amount of risk at 15% versus even 30 or 50, which some other projects have done. So it's a pretty basic building, and we feel comfortable with this process for this building, and especially the value at $200 a square foot, we believe is very fair.
Can we move on?
Yes, sir. Very quickly, just the two other projects. The dome site, we are finalizing the four main studies, which were the economic impact, the retail, the entertainment venue, and the parking. We have seen some of that preliminary final work, in particular the parking and the economic analysis. There's some seasonality and other assumptions that we've asked them to modify based on the experience that we have. But the work is almost complete. What we're recommending, Mayor, is that in August, we would expect to give you the final reports the first week of August would be our goal, so that you have them ahead of time, is that we bring all the consultants in that have done this work, and that your workshop be dedicated to that, that we give you an update on how the project has evolved, and hopefully at that point that we're ready to brief you on the terms for what we've been calling the pre-development agreement, which is like the term sheet. We also would ask that we be able to invite the Development Authority members to sit in here with you as well during that briefing. And that will give you the opportunity to really ask, really dig deep and ask all the questions of all the consultants who are available for that day. That would give us the opportunity to finalize a couple of the hurdles that we have with the terms that we're considering, and make sure that the reports are here and timely for you to review as well. The peer development, of course, we received the, we received, predominantly the 2 developer proposals and, of course, the vehicle, so to speak, that the Development Authority could be used for a lease arrangement. As part of the dome site development, leadership here and the Development Authority had asked that we look at the pier project in context of all the entertainment venue development, including the sports center. And so Lambert Advisory, who was the consultant for the economic analysis, has done a baseline of that. And we have an opportunity that we could do a continue work order to actually do the specificity of the 2 proposals that are before us. And we would recommend that we could do that work this summer and have that underway with a staff review of that, and then be ready for your direction and your review for next steps in the coming months.
Right? Any comments or questions?
And that's all I have this evening.
That's all you have. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Chief Ed Brazel is going to come through the door now, and we are going to get an update on a long-awaited application implementation called Pulse Point.
Good afternoon, everyone. Here, talk about Pulse Point. Many times, actually every time, person in my shoes stand up here, the cliche is, seconds matter. Lives, are in the balance. And when we talk about a cardiac arrest, truly seconds do matter. And we've invested a lot of energy, treasure, training, equipment into having a comprehensive network of the rescue squads, EMS, fire department, police, to get there quickly to help our patients cardiac arrest. We've also gone out and we push community CPR, AEDs out in public buildings, and we've done this whole thing because we know that what really matters if somebody has a sudden cardiac arrest is quick CPR, quick defibrillation. So wouldn't it be great, even though we've got this great network of police, fire, EMS, wouldn't it be great if we take that trained citizen responder who's out there in a parking lot and somehow marry them up with that AED and let them know there is this emergency? And that's what Pulse Point does. So what it is an app that works for public places. I'll talk about private places later. But when someone calls 911 and says, oh, there's CPR in progress or somebody's just not breathing, 911 does their thing. Help is responding, is rolling, but it also, this Pulse Point is listening to the CAD, and it hears, oh, there's a cardiac arrest at the corner of Walk and Don't Walk. And it sends a signal out to anyone that has Pulse Point, this app on their phone that's within 2,500 feet of this location. And it says, hey, we need you to come do CPR at the corner of Walk and Don't Walk, and oh, by the way, on your way, here's where the closest AED is, publicly available. So on their phone, you'll see a map, I'll show you in a minute, it shows the location. So they can get to the scene quicker while we're still getting dispatched over at the station to come responding. Someone maybe in this building could grab the AED and be doing their thing. So that's how it works. So ideally, this is a model in San Diego. So ideally with a big system, a big Pulse Point rollout and a lot of public awareness, you're blanketing your community, including way out in the ocean there, with responders who can respond to a sudden cardiac arrest instantly. So what it looks like, the person anybody can get this app. There's no screening, it's no cost. You go in and it tells you there's cardiac arrest, and then the map on your screen shows where it is. We'll give you directions on how to get there and where the closest AED is. Okay. So in this system, what it relies on in the background is how does it know there's an AED? There's another app, what I call the app that feeds the app. It's a AED crowdsourcing system that we didn't have to pay for this part. We had to pay for the Pulse Point part. But the AED app, what happens, someone sees an AED out in the hallway in a building, they take a picture, they upload the information to Pulse Point. Pulse Point notifies us. They will notify the Department of EMS, and we have a verification tool because maybe the property owner doesn't want someone running into their high security building, give me your $2,000 AED. We'll verify that, yes, do you want to be on the list? If so, we'll hook up a Pulse Point, we'll get it in there. So while today we've already populated all the city buildings, you're going to see, once this program goes on, you'll see more and more AEDs popping up all over the place as people report them in. So with that, so our Our plan for actually setting this up, we've already gone, we bought all the CAD connections, installed all that. That was our cost. It's about $13,000 a year to make this happen. We are testing it now. I've got it on my phone. It also has, with this, I didn't mention, it's showing every medical call that's going on in the city, every traffic collision, medical call. We haven't linked in fire cases yet. We're working on that. So PulsePoint subscribers can also get a sense of really what's going on out there, the volume of work that their responders are doing out there. It's pretty interesting. For confidentiality, it only gives the street address. So you'll only know there's a medical emergency on Virginia Beach Boulevard. That could be anywhere, but something in your neighborhood, it'll narrow it down a lot more. So we're in the testing phase. We've got worked out the bugs we found, and about June 25th, people will start being able to participate, and in July, we're going to have a big rollout, fanfare, media attention, that sort of thing. The follow-on, though, that's pretty cool that we found out partway through this project is there's another app called a Responder app, and they've just piloted this, and there's only a couple agencies on board, but we're looking hard at it. Is PulsePoint only applies to public locations, so this building or at the mall. But most cardiac arrests happen at home. And so what this system will do is a trusted agents that we populate. So think like our rescue squad members who want to participate or our employees. They will be notified of an event that happens within 2,500 feet of wherever they are, even in a private location, to be able to respond. We also see that this system, we could go in and create a major incident notification. So it's sort of a paging system, say there's a disaster, everybody come to your stations. And we can do that through the PulsePoint thing. That's about another $5,000, and we're just getting details on that and evaluating, but we see that's the next phase. But for the beginning, it's starting in July. We will have PulsePoint rolled out for the community.
Right. Yes, Jim.
Not a question, but a statement. I know this is something we've been working on for a long time. I'm really glad to see that it's moving forward. I know that it had to be integrated with the new CAD system, and I'm really pleased that we're getting this because, we have millions of overnight visitors that come here. A high percentage of them, I'm sure, have at least CPR training. We've probably got cardiac surgeons and everybody else sitting on the beach, on vacation. And, it's if something happens close by, it's a great way to leverage it. And as Ed says, we've got an incredible volunteer EMS system, and this is just one further thing. And I tell you, for $5,000 versus a cost of one radio with GPS capability, that's kind of a no-brainer. It's like it's 1.5 radios there you're talking about.
Yeah.
So.
I believe it's doable.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
I think so.
Yes, Josh.
I have a question. So is this supposed to basically get a private person, a citizen, to respond while we're waiting for?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just want to know. I figured that's what it was
Yeah,
for.
it's totally separate.
Right,
from,
it's not
from
supposed.
the CAD.
Okay,
Right.
and then the other question I had is how do, I guess, I know a lot of people who are CPR certified. How do they plug into this if they want to? Is it you just
You literally go
register
up
for
to
the
an app store and download the app.
There's
And-
no registration process on the part of the city.
No,
Okay.
the only registration will be if we do the Responder app. That will require a little more. There are places that are looking at healthcare providers being part of it. We're looking at it, our rescue squad members.
And as far as the integration in the app, does it give you as a user, does it let you say, okay, this is what I know how to do, so just send me alerts because I'm CPR certified?
It will only alert you to a cardiac arrest.
Okay,
You can
gotcha.
monitor what's going on
Just
throughout
for
the city for just
information.
kind of, but it will
Right.
only beep
Gotcha.
if you got cardiac arrest.
Awesome.
Barb.
Okay, if just anybody can get the app, how do we assure that the people who are responding are qualified to respond to somebody with a cardiac arrest and not just some cowboy?
That is one of the drawbacks. It is anybody can respond. There's no screening process to download the app.
Sounds scary though.
Well, and that's why in particular we screen, just because somebody sees an AED in their doctor's office doesn't mean that the doctor's office wants that AED to be a publicly accessible because of that issue. So it is one of the drawbacks of it, and that's why we really want to build out.
I want to know that you're
Yep.
qualified.
No.
Okay.
But we are really rolling out when we do the media attention to it, and the campaign is learn CPR, and this is where you can get CPR training. And so we want to push the people who have got training and interest in helping, not just a cowboy.
John.
Just a
Well, the
cowboy.
communities that have done this, go down to San Diego, I didn't realize they had it, but I know what our clearance rate has been, success rate, which is still most communities are under 50. This is still a high. What have they seen in terms of improved success rates as a consequence of the program?
A lot of it's anecdotal because most of the cardiac arrests do happen at home, but they're seeing a very high profile, if you will, case in these public places. And so it's new enough that there's not a lot of data to prove it's worth, other than they're getting help a lot faster, which improves the odds.
For that one, it's worth it. I was just curious because I know we have a very high success rate relative to the national average.
Early intervention is
And applaud you all for that. I was just curious how this program performed.
Our metric on this will be to see, we track how often people get citizen CPR before we arrive, and we're going to see if that number goes up and then the speed of an AED being used. There are a couple other cities, Chesapeake has it, and I think Norfolk recently rolled it out, and Chesapeake, I know, has had one case.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yep. Anybody have any questions? Not, thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
So, Mayor and members of council, on your agenda today, you have an I-5 ordinance, which is a cost participation agreement related to Asheville Park. And on J1, your planning item, you have a modification of proffers. And so to prepare you for that discussion and action, Tom Leahy is going to present to you a briefing on Asheville Park Phase 1 and cost participation agreement.
Ms. Henley?
Just so everybody's not surprised, I think the modification of agreements has to be decided first. And having this on the agenda before that, I think is totally out of order. But even having this on the same agenda as the other doesn't have great appearances. So that's just where I'm coming from to start with.
On that note, if I could, Mr. Mayor, I did talk with the city attorney since I had asked them if in fact the developer's willingness to sign this cost participation agreement was preconditioned on approval of the site plan modifications, which he said the answer was yes. They're not willing to sign the cost participation agreement unless we approve the site modifications. I do agree that since that's the case, you'd have to deal with the site plan first. And it does seem to be out of order that on the same night, which I have shared with everyone else, is to be voting on the agreement on the very same night. It gives the appearance, I know it's not legally that, because I've talked with them, of contract site modification, but it just looks wrong. And I would share Mrs. Hensley's concern about the appearance of the ordering of these votes.
Yes, Ben?
I agree with Barbara Henley as well.
All right, well, we may not make a decision tonight, and let's just hear it all.
Yep, I just wanted to.
I just wanted to kind of put it out there.
So how are you recommending that we do this?
Well, I think we have to decide the planning item first, the modification of agreements first. But, you know, even from our policy, something like this cost participation agreement being briefed and public hearing and vote the same night is kind of contrary to our policy. But I really think the question of the modification of the plan has to be first. Because if this cost participation is contingent on that, we would have to know whether we're going to modify the plan before we were going to approve the cost participation. So.
Well, if we don't make a decision tonight, I guess my point is we can hear both of them.
We can hear it.
Okay.
But just so everybody has the concerns out front.
All right, let's get started, okay?
Mayor, thank you, and members of council. Happy to talk to you about the cost participation agreement for Phase 1 of the Asheville Park Stormwater System. There will be many things similar to a presentation I provided about 6 weeks ago. Little chronology. First, in '04, City Council approved the first Asheville Park conditional rezoning. It had 6 villages, 490 lots. Presumably 474 acres of a subdivision, but that turned out, I think, to be incorrect, and 160 age-restricted units. A year later, the council modified that rezoning, down to 5 villages, but 499 lots, and I think they'd gotten the surveying correct by that time, so it was 452 acres and 169 age-restricted lots. So in the next 2 years, the developer put in his construction plans. They were under review. They were reviewed, approved in 2006, and construction began in Village A, which is also known as Wilshire. That was the village that had the TBA's Homerama some years back. Then we got hit with the housing bubble that burst in 2008. Wells Fargo foreclosed on the subdivision. The city assumed ownership of the streets and utilities and the stormwater system that had been completed. Then in 2012, early February, Wells Fargo came back and asked council to lift the age restrictions on the Village B. They did. Shortly after that, they conveyed the foreclosed property to HomeFed, who is the current developer today. A few months later, the Village B plans were approved and construction began in Village B, also known as Rainier. And then timing is everything, and about 3 or 4 months after that, we had some storms in November, and all of a sudden the stormwater deficiencies started to rear their head.
Was that Sandy?
You know what, I don't know, maybe some Public Works guys remember?
I know that was the morning, it was Hurricane Sandy that I went out there and saw the flooding, but I was wondering if that was 2012 or, okay, could have been another time.
Sandy was in 2012, October 2012 was Sandy.
So it was Hurricane Sandy, yeah. The ducks were swimming in the
I was in
water,
New York.
Rivers, streets over there. Okay.
So for the next 2 or 3 years, Public Works attempted to work with the original designer of the stormwater system to try to figure out what was wrong. Public Works Operations were looking at pipes to see if they were blocked. They were trying to do surveys on the lakes to see if for some reason the amount of storage wasn't there. Groundwater measuring was going on to find out why the groundwater was different from what had been designed. During that time, HomeFed came back and asked the Planning Commission to recommend 87 more units in villages C, D, and E, which they did in 2014. Council indefinitely deferred that. And a year later, the HomeFed asked the Planning Commission to transfer some units amongst villages B, C, D, and E. You indefinitely deferred that at the time. But that is the subject that you have, the subject of the agenda item on your Planning Commission agenda tonight. In 2016, about the summertime, Public Works concluded that we simply weren't going to get anywhere working with the original designer of the system. So we decided we would have to reverse engineer the Asheville system and try to figure out exactly why it simply wouldn't work. And after that, a few months after that, we got struck by Julia and Matthew. The two of those storms together were record-setting. Actually, individually, they were record-setting, and together, and so close together, they were even more so. And in early 2017, Public Works completed its modeling of the Asheville system, and essentially from beginning to end, it had serious capacity deficiencies. It's a very useful table, actually assembled by planning, that will walk you through the applications and the decisions that were made back to the early 00s until today. There is we often, I guess for convenience, say that the item in front of you tonight is to transfer 18 units from villages D and E into C, but that's not exactly correct. The item in front of you tonight would transfer 21 units, 18 of which goes into C, and 3 of which would go into D. So I've put that there. I've shown that on the side. You can see which villages would lose units, which villages would gain units. And in Village B, those units are basically units that were authorized to be built but weren't built. So they're kind of phantom units, I would guess, would be a way to say it.
Question. And in reading all these transcripts because I did ask for, and I guess all of you got this handy little book with all of the planning items and the analysis and the transcripts from planning commissions and city councils, because going back to these applications, you really have to have the full train. I could not figure out why the first plan was approved based on 474 acres, and they were granted 490 units. And then when the acreage went down because a survey was done, it went down to 452 acres, but the number of units went up to 499. I don't know how reducing the acreage allowed the units to go up. I know that there were some additional units granted because they were supposed to be age restricted. And of course, when they took the age restriction off, they didn't have to give any of those units back. But I could never account for that 9 additional lots being granted when the acreage went down.
Do you?
Nobody has an answer. Okay. I just thought I was missing something obvious.
Good question.
So everybody wants to know, well, how could this happen? Back in '04 and '05, there was no requirement or guideline to have the applicant prepare a preliminary stormwater evaluation before requesting a rezoning. And as we've heard several times, stormwater just wasn't discussed during all the considerations for the Asheville rezoning. Back in those days, stormwater design was addressed during plan review. The plan review process relied greatly on the developer's professional engineer to properly design the system. It's not to say that we didn't review it, but our review was somewhat high level, and it was geared towards ensuring that policies and regulations were being satisfied. We would comment and review and prod the engineer on things that didn't look quite right, but that we didn't have at the time a process, either the manpower or the process, that would go and reverse engineer every calculation they did to find out, to essentially double check everything they did. It was assumed that the developer's engineer would turn in a design that would work. We didn't have the resources, and just to put that in perspective, the Asheville model took 9 months and $250,000 to reverse engineer so that we could actually answer specifically what pipes were too small, what lakes were too small, what outfall was too small. And it turned out they were all too small.
Where did that money come from?
That came out of Public Works, stormwater. Now, I can tell you exactly the account. I can't tell you right now, but I'll get that for you. But
just to analyze this one. Wow.
I'm not sure if we had an Asheville CIP at that time. If we did, it came out of that. But otherwise, it may have just come out of your modeling CIP. So again, Public Works and Planning applied the same standards that they followed for subdivisions at the time. For the most part, that had certainly worked in the northern part of the north of the transition zone. It had produced good results. Asheville Park wasn't the first development in the transition area, but, and this is all hindsight, when we look at groundwater levels and the elevation differences between the land and the receiving streams and the distances, it's a very big deal in the Asheville system. The length of the distance that the water has to travel from where it rains and where it has to end up. That subdivision has serious, then and now, serious challenges to stormwater solutions. Everything that could work against it does and did. To sum this up, I don't know if you have any individuals you can point to, but just no one at the time, whether it was the city or the developer, realized the extent to which that layout, that particular layout, and the geophysical characteristics of that property really combined to be greatly at odds with the construction of a workable stormwater system. So instead of let's switch from talking about the past to talk about the future. The Phase 1 project that we are want to move forward with would provide flooding relief to the 299 families in villages A and B. During a 100-year storm, as defined by what we call NOAA Atlas 14, don't worry about that now, but in the coming weeks and months, I'll be telling you about that. But right now, a 100-year storm, which is our current standard, there would be no water in the living spaces. You might still see some ponding in the yards and the streets, but the draining away would be in hours instead of days, according to the model. On major storms, you're still going to get the streets are going to fill up. If you've got a car very low to the ground, you'll probably, before hurricanes, want to move it up into your driveway. Interesting fact, in the 60s when I lived in Princess Anne Plaza, we had to do that when we knew a storm was coming, to get our cars up into the, up on the driveway. So they'd still be at risk if they were down on the streets. There would be a lot of other benefits in the 2, 10, 5-year storms, the more frequent storms, the stuff we deal with almost every year, in that the system will not hold so much water. One of the problems with this system is that it was so restricted that all you had to do was have a wet summer, and little by little the lakes were filling and filling and filling. The water couldn't get out of the system, and then you'd get a real, just get a storm, 4 inches or so, and since the lakes were already full, it would be everywhere. The design of this system lets the water out of the system a whole lot faster and lets the lakes get back to their normal pool elevation a whole lot quicker. Phase 1's designed assuming that Village C would develop at 98 or 116 lots. Doesn't make any difference. But Phase 1 will not allow Village E or D to develop. There would need to be other projects. There's the there's a picture site plan of the project. I have it over here. It is labeled, you'll see little boxes labeled city and boxes labeled developer. Essentially, the project's been broken up into on-site and off-site projects. Off-site projects are away from the subdivision proper, and the city would build those. That involves a new pump station, a new weir, which actually is moving forward right now, and improvements to the Sandbridge Road, Newbridge Road intersection, and the ditch that moves water from the current weir to Asheville Bridge Creek. Also, the city would make some improvements to the Princess Anne ditch on the west side of Princess Anne Road. Everything else is inside what we call Asheville proper, and those would be assigned to the developer. The primary project is to improve this trunk system. It is a system that runs through the center of the subdivision from the west side of Princess Anne Road over to the east side. I don't know if we have a little point. Anyway, over to the east side at Sandbridge Road where the water discharges. That's a distance of about 2 miles, and that is one of the problems with this subdivision. The water has to go a very long way to the discharge, and there's a very short elevation distance between the low elevations in Village B and the discharges out at Asheville Bridge Creek.
Can you point out to us the trunk, where you say the trunk system?
The trunk system. Essentially, this is the trunk system. It runs down through the center. It splits Village A and B in half, runs along the south side of Village C, and would run to the north of Villages D and E. So all the water from these villages flow into this system of canals and lakes that are all interconnected, and the water moves from here, has to move all the way through here to be discharged out there. So basically, Phase 1 makes improvements to what I call the trunk system, the common to all system that runs through Asheville Park.
So it's all discharged at one point?
Well, no, not exactly. Part of this is the regrading this historic ditch that splits Village A in half, and some water would run north to that ditch system. Actually goes up, crosses Sandbridge Road, ends up in the moving through that big BMP there off of Upton, and ends up coming around through Scopius Marsh Creek and comes down that way. But most of the water would still continue to discharge from over at Flanagan's Lane.
Ms. Henley?
But that developed part right at the top of your screen there is actually Heritage Park, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So that's another development, that's Heritage Park.
But Heritage does not drain into that ditch.
It goes north.
Yeah, but Heritage goes north. It ends up actually coming down through Asheville Bridge Creek.
But it goes up, it doesn't come down, so those houses really just tie into the Heritage Park ditch, is what you're saying.
Some of Heritage Park does drain into that ditch. That ditch is much lower than Heritage Park because I drive by it every day and you're looking way down on it. But a little bit, this little tail end of Heritage Park drains into that ditch, but that water all moves north. And it comes around, like I say, it's got a long way to go through a very large canal system and ends up coming around through Scopius Marsh Creek by Lake Tecumseh. If you can get on the map, it seems like a long way to go, but that's the way it goes. But again, most of the water would go out through Flanagan's Lane. There is an outfall up there on BMP 8, but I think our model says that you have to have such a massive storm and there's so much flooding before that outfall actually overflows anything. Did I get that right, guys? Okay. Now, I've got that picture up here, but I'll come back to this if you want. But the phase one is it adds more stormwater retention in the form of new BMPs. It adds more transmission capacity in the form of canals to move the water. And then it adds the new weir and pump station, and that's the point of getting the lakes down lower so the lakes can hold more stormwater.
Yes, John?
And I assume that pumping station is going to be a watertight pumping station, and that the appropriate auxiliary things are gonna be properly elevated, and all the things to take at least 150% of what, because the power, without power, it's not pumping. So power becomes critical for that thing to work. So it's a pumping station itself, unlike at Rosemont Forest when it got overwhelmed and itself got flooded out. So will that thing be designed to be like an above ground submarine so the water's getting in and it's gonna have the power source and the fuel to run that without power?
It's high enough. Our plan, we believe that it's high enough to handle 1.5 feet of ultimate seawater rise. But any pump station, if the water eventually comes up high enough to where the outflow and the inflow merge into one, the pump station will shut down because you're just pumping the water in a circle at that time. But
Well, obviously if it's flooding so much, that's true, but I'm asking about relative to the elevation getting back. So now if you're saying that the elevation on that side is that if we get more than 1.5 feet level of sea rise, then the system fails.
no, well, what I was saying is they'll design that for the 100-year storm as far as plus freeboard for at least 1.5 feet of seawater rise. If 3 feet is acceptable, they'll design it for 3 feet of seawater rise. But the system will work with at least 1.5 feet. It has been designed to work if you add 1.5 feet onto the receiving stream.
I'm just trying to make sure that when you have the tides and all that stuff push up that way, that
It's been designed, yes. The gated weir is a tide gate block, and the whole design of the system is to be able to raise the weir when wind tides bring that water up and actually block that water and then pump over that.
okay, so I just want to make sure that these pumping stations aren't going to be flooded out by a
So
flood.
it's going to block the water coming up with the wind tide, and it's going to pump water into it also?
If necessary. This pump station will only pump when we have knowledge that we think we're going to get a 4-inch or greater storm in 24 hours. The weir itself and the additional storage will handle everything by gravity just fine. When wind tides come, the weir will come up and block water from essentially filling up the lakes in Asheville. We would not operate the pump if there wasn't any rainfall on the horizon. But if the weir is up and the wind tides have brought the water up, and we think a big storm's coming, we might decide to turn that pump station on to get those lakes down as low as possible.
Okay, is that going to cause flooding on the other side of the weir?
It does add an inch or so to the water in the ditch, but we are making massive improvements to that ditch and to a major culvert downstream. So while it will add to the ditch, the improvements are going to lower everything. So everything's going to work better, but yes, when when the wind tides are up, and if we are pumping, we will be adding an inch to whatever was there.
I don't know if this is the place to ask this question, but somewhere, if you would address it, I know there's been a lot of questions coming about the water quality issue, and if this pumping is going to mean that the water quality is not as good because of the fact that it's being pumped off before it has a chance to settle out or whatever. But then there's also questions about our water quality testing, and if we are doing the testing that's going to be necessary to assure that all of this pumping isn't doing damage downstream.
So
Wherever
yes,
you
ma'am.
need to address that.
The same, well, I might as well do it now. The same water that flows into Asheville Bridge Creek will continue to flow into that creek. With phase one, we are increasing the storage by several times. We're increasing the area by more than double. So there will be more settling, more bioretention in those lakes.
But if you build 200 more houses, there's going to be more runoff because you've got more surfaces that are not going to be able to absorb the water running off.
Yes.
And so you're going to have a faster runoff, and you're going to have more automobiles
I'm
and
in a
all of that
council
stuff.
meeting.
So 200 more houses is going to,
Okay,
that's
thank
a
you.
lot of concern in the quality part.
The original detention, the original stormwater lakes did satisfy the Virginia Stormwater Management Program for water quality. So yes, there's no doubt you develop any property and the runoff from that property is not as good as its undeveloped counterpart. But we are now adding 50% more lake surface area, and I forget the number, but it's more than doubling the amount of storage and retention time in the system. So we will be taking, I know that's been an issue. We're going to start pulling water quality samples in the lakes and the pumps now at the temporary pump station. We just don't anticipate a problem. The only issue that I identified in terms of water quality is that this pump station will pull from a low part of the lake. And if the lake were to stratify in the summertime, you would pull low dissolved oxygen water, and that happens now when you pump water from lakes or dams that draw it from a deep part. But we'll design a weir around that intake that will force all the water in the intake to come from the surface. That's a pretty standard practice. Whether it's a giant dam or a small pump station, it's very, very standard practice to design a weir like that. So all the water comes from the surface. It always has good dissolved oxygen. It doesn't pull sediments or low DO water from the bottom.
Bob?
Yeah, Tom, is there another project, Pungo Ridge, that's on the radar that may have an impact on all this?
The Pungo Ridge project down here, which is very poorly defined, and we really don't know a lot about it, but it has been suggested that if this project develops, they will take, right now, this Pungo Ridge area adds about 9% of the water to Asheville Park, because about 39 acres of here flows into Asheville Park. It's about 9% of the watershed surface. Now, that's throttled through a pipe, and so both the impact of that water and the benefit of taking that water away are throttled. But if this project, as we've understood it, were to go forward, there would be some small incremental improvements in Rainier. And we've quantified that, actually had a presentation for you a couple of, a year or so ago, and quantified. It's not staggering, but it's not insignificant either.
Can you refresh our memory as to how much water it will take?
This was about 9% of the total surface area, so you're talking about 9%, assuming that the rainfall fell evenly across all the properties, about 9% of the water. But it is throttled through a pipe right here, and so it doesn't raise the peaks like it would if it were uncontrolled drainage going into the subdivision. But it does flow in through the piping system here, and when we modeled, we actually turned it off in the model. We did find some minor improvements. When I say minor, 3 to 4 inches of improvement in the elevation. by themselves, not great or significant. When you add it to the improvements of Phase 1, yeah, there's some cumulative benefits. But I wouldn't recommend that be, I would not worry about that. You've got a lot of other things on, whether it's called Pungo Ridge or Harvest Farms, you've got a lot of other things to consider besides that. So the term sheet and the CPA would be laid out where the developer would build the on-site components. I've listed them there. The city would build the off-site components.
But the city is going to be reimbursing the developer for his building. It's not.
I'm getting to that right now. Yep. Great minds think alike. That's the next slide. So the total project cost is $11.1 million. We've negotiated a cost share with the developer, 72% for the city, 28% for the developer. That's simply based on the number of lots in Village C and the number of lots in Villages A and B, and the adding them together and calculating the ratios. So the developer's cost share would be $8 million. Our cost share would be $8 million. The developers would be $3.1 million. Part of this plan would have us buy a 5.5 acre site from the developer, so for $364,000. We would then own this new BMP 10A right here, and by owning that in fee simple, the city can bank $2.1 million of stormwater credits that we can and would be using for projects in the southern watershed.
Yes.
Okay, if the city is going to purchase 5.5 acres, the developer has already gotten lots density credit for those 5.5 acres. He will then be losing that density credit because he will no longer own that property.
Yeah, that'd be one way to look at it. Yes, ma'am.
Is that part of the agreement?
No, we really didn't, the developer, we actually didn't discuss with the developer 98 or 116 or 499 or any alterations. We discussed the cost share and the stormwater project. So when you net out that sale, the developer's cost share would be $2.75 million. All other properties and easements that we would need for to operate and maintain the stormwater system would be dedicated to us at no cost. So as I indicated earlier, we'd be responsible for the off-site components, the developer's responsible for the on-site. We would pay the developer for the construction of the on-site less his $2.75 million cost share. If the low bid exceeds a cost cap that's in the agreement, the city would have the right to renegotiate. If the low bid comes in lower than our estimate, the developer would retain the first $1 million of savings, and everything above that, he'd split 50-50.
Please explain that rationale. Why isn't that first million also 50-50?
You know, when you get into negotiations, this is the best, we got out with, this is the best deal we could get. When you look at this cost, it is and you spread it over, say, 98 or 116 units, it's about $30,000 a lot, anywhere from $25,000 to $30,000 a lot. And you get to the point where the developer, I'm just assuming, because, these negotiations, we don't read each other's minds, but you get to the point where the developers, he has to be able to make some money if he's going to build the development. So you get to the point where this was just the best, this was the best deal after many, many months of.
Any savings go into a contingency? I mean, isn't this all based on a 30% design?
It's based on a 30% design.
So we really don't know what it's going to come out to be, and I would think any savings would need to go into a contingency.
Yes, Joe.
My question deals with going back, and we started off with the basis that we had to have cost participation, but what if we just want to deal with the parcels that are developed for which we accepted a deficient system and just fixed what was our problem and left the developer on his remaining parcels undeveloped to fix his problem, and we exercise the authorities that we have to do that, which we do. I've checked with the city attorney. We have the legal authority to implement that. What is that solution and what is that cost? Because in negotiations, if you don't understand what your no alternative is, meaning I don't want the cost participate because I don't find the what you want to get it worthwhile, it breaches a commitment with the public that we have an intangible value on. Not saying that you'd have that, but we might have that as a body. And then we say, okay, if we just want to solve the problem that we have on the developed parcels that we're responsible for, what is that solution and what is that cost? Because then that gives you a baseline by which you can understand whether or not it's more, it's less, it's a time, but you don't have any baseline to evaluate whether or not the, and I'll use this word concession, some people don't like my other word, but I'll use the word concessions that you make to get to do it the other way, which then also enables, to Barbara's point, I think, provides an enabling part to develop those parcels that maybe if they had it their other way and had to bear those own costs, you need to know what their cost is too, because that gives you an idea of your bargaining position that you have. And are you really, really, truly splitting the difference, which I think we would like to understand. But if you don't know the two endpoints, what they do without us and what that costs, and what does it cost us if we do it without them, I don't know how you can come back and say that we know that we did the best that we could. We just know that's what they would accept. And we think we need to accept because the people in those other parcels want their flooding fixed. And I understand all that, but there is a difference in perspective. And I don't know if we know that number, how hard it is to know our number, but clearly we legally can do that.
Well, okay, so legally, perhaps we could do that. As from an engineering matter, it's very, very difficult to solve the problem of moving water from A and B past C and pretend it doesn't exist.
No, but we can use...
Many of these improvements have to be made, they have to be made in order to get this water over there as well. So there's some of them, perhaps these BMPs might not be necessary.
Are you suggesting we can't exercise eminent domain to get easements to put a pipeline in to get us to that point?
No, what I'm suggesting is it doesn't change the scope of the project a lot, because it's very difficult for us to fix a problem that moves water in that direction and then somehow exclude that property to the north.
I got you, but if you told me that we can do the project, because that's how we put in the CIP, our
Right.
own money. If we can do this project for $11 million or $12 million
Yeah.
or whatever that number is, exercising our legal authorities, and don't need cost participation because we're not happy with having to increase the density, I'm just saying, is that an executable project?
Oh, we do not need the cost participation. We would really like it, several $1 million, but we do not absolutely need cost participation. And the other issue is and I've only been here 4 decades, kind of relatively short time, but when we lay out infrastructure, and this has been since day one, you lay out infrastructure to the thought that whatever is in the comprehensive plan, whatever council's approved, you design that infrastructure for. And I just don't know if I could ever think of a situation where we would design infrastructure to exclude something that council's already approved and is in the comprehensive plan.
We didn't approve to pay for the cost. My other question is, the benefit that accrues, you say these credits that accrue to road projects, normally when we would build those road projects in the CIP, those costs would be charged off to the road project and not off to the stormwater management fee. So my question is, because that's the users of the system, so when those projects come online and we calculate the cost, will those CIP projects be charged that amount, and will there be a cash deposit in the stormwater?
Absolutely.
That would be very important to have.
I think it's in the memo, actually.
Well,
I think it's in the memo attached, but
brief.
Not in the brief, but no, I had every
Important to let
intention.
people know, because I don't think we want to be any other place, whether it's Lynn Haven Parkway improvements, they're doing those capital improvements, and we're not asking the users and the user fee to pay for that initial capitalization. So I just want to make sure that we're keeping track of that and that money gets put back in there. So we're not.
I already talked to
Rosemary, you had
David
a
Bradley
question.
about it. We had every intention at the end of the year, there would be a transfer made back to the stormwater CIP for that.
Thank you.
Rosemary.
So, I had, Tom.
Oh.
So the developer's been approved for 499 units. Is that correct?
The developer has been approved for a total of 499 units. Is there anybody from planning here in case they want to correct me? So Barry, you please stand up and correct me if I make say anything wrong. But yes, that's my understanding.
So 499 units have been approved. So if we did nothing, can move forward to build what they've been approved for. Is
But
that
they're
correct?
losing acreage and they're still getting to keep the units for that stormwater retention pond that they lost acreage for, they're keeping the houses.
And they would have to build to the new standards. They would have to build to the new standards. So if we didn't take away any of their units, we didn't do anything, they keep the plan they've got, they can build what was approved, they can build it.
So, I mean, the newspaper was very misleading when they said we were gonna allow them to double. Because they're,
Built.
right, but, I mean, they've already been allowed.
Well,
Because-
they have that approval.
They have the
Whether they
approval.
can build it or not is. I
If
mean,
zoning.
That's the
The land is
question.
in flood zone, they might not be able to build those number of houses, that's what she's saying.
The question then that I'm hearing here is if we don't participate with them and they try to build 499 units, are they going to have to build according to the new guidelines, or are they going to build according to what the guidelines were at the time that it was approved?
So I'm gonna need Barry to, what are you pointing at me for? You need to step up.
Why don't you come up, Barry?
Okay. That'd be a good idea, wouldn't it?
Barry, while you're doing that too, can you kind of help me determine what has been approved and what's been built? I mean, I'm assuming Village A has been completely built, right?
A
I
and
can't
B
hear.
there may be a lot or two in B that isn't built on, but A and B are essentially
I'm just
built
trying to
out.
get a sense of
Right.
what you've got there and what is still.
There are no site plans approved for the new development. So, I can't see any reason why they would not have to meet the new regulations. That the zoning doesn't imply any change of the site plan regulations. So they will have to meet the new regulations.
So they
And
have
what,
zoning.
regardless of what was rezoned or what is changed, they still, there are no site plans approved for that work.
So they have zoning, but they have no site plan approval.
That's correct.
Okay, Jim.
So then, with absent site plan approval and having to meet the new standards, then that number could reduce based on meeting the new guidelines? Do they have the vested right to build X number of units?
That is a very good question.
By the plan that they have.
They have the right to build it by zoning. And that's the issue we come up with all along, is the actual development, the actual site plan. Typically we've never seen it to be more, okay? We usually see it to be less. But I can't tell you which way it's going to be. All I can tell you is that if they come in and they can't meet the regulations for the number of units and they have to build less units, then that's what we're going to approve. Less units. Does that answer
They
your
have the
question?
right to build up to a total of 499.
From zoning, but not from site
That's what
plan.
I'm saying, but they have the right to
Yes.
build up
Maximum
to that if
Yes.
everything else works out.
Right, correct.
I guess the problem is we don't know what they can build and what they can't build.
Well, that was one of the
Barry,
reasons they applied, asked for this.
have they submitted a
this
preliminary plan, or-
Modification, because more wetlands were there
No.
than they thought, which means
So
they
is this
can't.
site plan
So the
approval
only
or
way they can
construction
do it
plan
is if we
approval?
approve the
This?
modifications.
This is-
They would have to get construction plan.
This is only zoning approval.
No, I'm saying the process, they would have to get a preliminary plan approved, then they'd have to get, you're saying. site
Well,
approval.
we wouldn't make them have a preliminary plan because if you already approved the zoning, but they will have to go through the site plan process and get approval for the stormwater, construction plan, erosion settlement control, building permits, all those kind of things.
All right, Barbara.
But what they have approved is not just a rezoning. What they've got approved is a conditional rezoning, and they must build according to the approved plan, which right now is the plan that was approved in 2012.
Right. That's
What
correct.
they're asking us to do is modify that plan so they can build smaller lots in some places than they would have otherwise, and moving the lots around and reconfiguring. So This is unique because it has to be built by the approved plan unless we change it.
That,
Correct?
I'm going to say you're correct. However, we have 4 sheets of details on the size of the lots and the changes. So let me, if you don't mind, think about it, and I'll make sure that I can answer that question later, all right? Because it's, I'd like to say yes, but I'm frankly not totally positive. My recollection is some got smaller and some got higher, but I would have to.
Somewhere, if I may,
Yes, please.
somewhere in the conversation, the fact that the city approved their public stormwater construction plans and built those was the basis by which HomeFed acquired the property in foreclosure and moved forward with the original plan with the modifications to senior citizen for parcel B. It is the determination by which they have created the number of parcels that they are desiring to build in C. My fear is that if we don't partner with them, they can pull back again and do nothing. And where does that leave us at that point?
Can I ask the attorneys if they feel like they want to say something? So I'd like to ask them what he'd like to say.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump in here. I think.
Sure you do, Chris. Come on up to the podium.
Okay, I can answer your question later about some of the lots went from 20,000 square feet to 13,500 or 18,000, and some went from 12,000 to 20,000. So there, I don't know if it's net equal. We could figure that out for you, but there is change. Some get bigger, some get smaller. All right, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Just 2 points that inform the decision, and it's a legislative decision ultimately. 2 pieces though are that first, the real property necessary for these improvements is presently owned by HomeFed, and so whether by condemnation or otherwise, you would have to acquire that in order to do the phase 1 improvements you want to do. So that may militate in favor of some type of cooperation. The second piece of it is if we build it ourselves on our own nickel, and then 3-4 years from now, then arguably somebody comes in and they have an approvable project for these additional units because we built it at our own expense. So 2 things to think about. Again, a legislative decision, but there's a context there.
And that last comment, that's why I didn't, the last point we put in that someone comes in and we have to, I didn't catch that.
Well, the idea is if we, at our own nickel, at our own expense, build the entire system to the same level of phase 1 that we are talking about in partnership with HomeFed, then that would be constructed and you would potentially have an approvable infrastructure system there to then put more units in at the end of the day.
So if we only built it specifically to approve the demand and the flow from the parcels that were developed, that would not be true. Don't say what we wouldn't do. You don't know what we would do. Sorry.
Again, it's ultimately a policy decision. I just wanted to make sure that.
All right, Ms. Henley has a question for
But
you.
I think the situation is what he's got is that he's got a drainage system that doesn't work. Okay, so he bought a used car that doesn't have a good engine. Okay, he's got a drainage system. He bought a used development that doesn't have the drainage system he thought it had when he bought it. And now he's looking for the taxpayers to fix it so he can build what he wants to build. But the uniqueness, too, about this development is the number of units, these 499 lots, were given to him based on the gross acreage, plus what he was going to get if he had age restriction, and then that was allowed to stay. But he's already gotten gross acreage, his density credit for all of that. So in effect, he's kind of already benefited from the acreage, no matter whether he still owns it or whatever. He's been paid for it. He's been paid in density. And so there's open space, but that's open space that was left because that density was allowed to be scrunched up in other places. So the very way that this density has been allocated has already, all of the property in that development has benefited from the acreage, the density. That's how the density was allocated or paid to him. And I would think they would be delighted to have us come in and build this, because then they would be able to build their 98 lots as it was approved initially. So why wouldn't they be willing to gratefully allow us to build it on their property? That would make sense to me. But anyway, that's not always the way.
All right, Tom, if you need to.
I don't want to speak for the developer. I think timing had something to do with their willing to cost participate. If they could always wait and we'll move forward with phase one, and then they could come back and apply for and put in plans. Wouldn't even need to talk to this body, but they put plans in and get them approved for their 98 units. But that would be, it'd take us 2 or 3 years to do what they'll do on site, because they're going to have all the equipment on site while they're building Village C. They'll be knocking out that earthwork at the same time. So it goes a lot quicker with the developer and a cost share. But it could have, I mean, the developer, that is one choice the developer would have. Wait till we finish phase one on our own. Of course, we would get no cost share under those circumstances.
Tom, how long in your guesstimate would it take for us to move forward on our own with the phase one improvements that are shown?
Well, we've got a 30% design. We're already moving ahead with some. We'd go immediately to design. It would probably take us, what, 2 or 3 years? You're saying 2 years. Okay, so the director says he thinks he could do it in 2 years.
Right away is going to get on a critical path, because we're going to have to go purchase property or
From the homeowners association or from the developer?
Well, the developer is the homeowners association right now. They own the property. They control
We'll
it.
take an action to condemn, and whether or not that's quick or we can do quick. So we'll go to court on that cost too, which he is willing to dedicate at this time. So just know that 11 million starts to grow.
So he is holding us hostage, that he will dedicate it as long as we allow him to do this. But if we don't allow him to do this, he won't dedicate it.
I don't know that I would say hostage. I would just say it's part of the whole, it's all part of the cost participation agreement to get it done, so.
It's great if you can make the taxpayers pay it.
Oh, we're going to have to pay it anyway to fix it. So I'm not sure we're getting out of the deal here. We bought A and B, gang, and we're stuck with it, and we do have some commitments to fix it.
Let's talk about phase two.
Yes,
All right, this is phase one. All right, if there's a phase one, there must be a phase two. What is that estimated cost?
I don't think we.
24 million.
I think we can tell you that it's yet to be determined until we see what Dewberry says and how this entire area fits into the whole Southern Watershed Plan.
So should we know that before we go forward? I mean, we're not just committing to phase one here. And then if he goes ahead and builds 200 more houses, then instead of 300 people demanding to have their flooding fixed, we've got 500 houses demanding to have their flooding fixed, which is another $24 million. We've got to talk about the whole thing here. If we're going forward with phase one, then there's got to be a phase two. How much is that going to cost, and who's going to be paying it? If we don't know the whole story here, we shouldn't start this trek.
Yes, Rosemary.
So if we approve this, when could it be started and when would it be finished?
I think they're prepared to move late summer, early fall, mobilize early fall. They have a requirement to complete, as you saw in some of the terms, to complete several of the BMPs before they can really commence on their sellable units. They can move forward with models, but the models can't be connected to water and sewer or provide any kind of livability to them. So, I mean, they're anxious.
One problem that we have is that every time it rains, people are scared. Every time it rains, you know, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And I mean, I agree, in the perfect world, it would be nice to have every information we can, but it troubles me to delay and delay because, wow, we've got hurricane season coming.
When are we getting the Dewberry study?
Well, let me
won't be
ask,
done
I
by
mean,
that.
I thought
be done by
that Barry
October.
just said that they
No,
had not
but
submitted preliminary plans
Still,
or.
there's nor'easters.
Oh, they're working on them as we say.
Newberry report this
They're
fall.
prepared to move forward with
So
this
if they were
partnership.
to be able to mobilize in the end of summer, you're saying, so in 2 months, they're gonna have their plans approved?
I think they'll be prepared. They're probably fairly close.
We haven't seen anything.
So you haven't seen the preliminary
What
plans?
we're
So
dealing
that's-
with,
that's
let me
not- I
see
mean,
how I
wouldn't be able to
analyze
get
this, okay?
Preliminary and a construction plan approval in 2 months. I would think there's a.
Well, remember the most difficult part of getting those plans approved, city council, is the stormwater plan.
Yeah.
You got the 30% of the
Well,
stormwater
Rosemary
plan
was
in
asking
place.
how long it would take them to move forward with the improvements with the cost participation. We've been told 2 years without the cost participation for us to do it on our own. And so with mobilization, what, a year and a half it would take them to probably complete these improvements? So we're only talking about giving up 6 months moving forward on our own.
So our 2 years starts after we've acquired all the right-of-way we've needed. That in itself, when it's a friendly changeover, that can occur in a matter of a few months. When it's a hostile take, or if there's a problem, we can spend a year or more
We can
on.
quick take the property, is that not correct, given the purpose for which we're doing?
Yes, we can condemn for.
We can proceed while the litigation continues on value, so that's not a time factor.
Let me tell you how I see this thing. What we're dealing with is a question of how much risk we want to take for another big storm to hit. And the people in Asheville Park are inundated with that storm versus how much we might be willing to pay to be able to demonstrate that we've done everything we can to try to keep these people safe. There's no way we can keep them safe from a storm like Matthew. That's for sure. But for a 100-year storm, if we spend the money, then our engineers are telling us that they can prevent flooding in the houses and so forth. So that's the way I see it. Am I incorrect, or am I?
Yeah, the streets might flood. but-
Correct.
Yeah. So it's really a question of how much you want to pay, or if you want to pay anything to prevent that from occurring. And you know, I understand the logic that, you know, that it should not be the taxpayer's responsibility to pay for the fact that these people bought a pig in a poke. And that's what it comes down to, too, is they bought a development in, I don't know how they bought it, whether they bought it in
From a trustee
foreclosure or
sale.
what, but whatever way they bought it, they bought a development that's not adequately engineered for the future development of the project in a safe manner for the people that they would sell the property to. And do we want to spend money to keep them from continuing to build and create a risk for the people who buy the lots and the houses that are built in that development? That's the way I see it, and it's kind of a how much responsibility do we have as a result of approving the plans when they were approved, and relying upon the engineers who the private engineers who did the plans and submitted them. I understand that was the policy at that time, but the point is how much responsibility we have for having that policy. And so that's just the way I see it. Yes, Ruth.
People went and they bought these homes thinking that they were safe. They had no idea that, you know, that these were all approved, the sites were approved, and it all looked good, and the rains came. And I think we owe something to these folks, and we need to step out and help them.
Yes, Barbara.
I don't think we're talking about not fixing it for the people who are there now. I think we're all in agreement that that needs to happen. Phase one needs to go forward. It's whether or not we're going to do it, the city is going to do it, or whether or not we're going to commit to 200 more houses being built there for $3 million. I would rather go ahead and have the city pay the entire cost of this phase one and get it moving as quickly as we can.
Coming through the door.
And phase one. And then whatever happens, happens in the future. But I don't think the question is whether or not we're going to fix it for the people who are there. I think we're all in agreement. Yes, we do have the responsibility to fix it for the people who are there. But it's whether we're going to get in this deal and cost participate, which is going to lead at this point, we really don't know where.
Okay, that, I think Barbara's made a good point. Now, what I want to know is what's the downside to that?
The opportunity cost exceeds $4 million, not only for the cost associated by their participation in cost agreement, cost share agreement, but also the $2 million in TMDL credits, as well as the potential to have to pay for whatever settles out through the condemnation action for the real estate. So somewhere in there, we will facilitate their ability to move forward and to get their stormwater approval and to come in and do their by right units. It will be delayed for them, but they will have that ability to walk right in on the heels of full government expenditure for stormwater associated with that. There may be a plus or minus, some additives associated with the modeling that will occur once they get in there, but
Dave, could I ask you a question?
Sure.
You know, the purchase of the BMP and us using that to get the credits, could we purchase a BMP in any area in the southern watershed and do the same thing? Or is this this is the only one we could purchase?
well, we have condemnation here, but anywhere, the mitigation has to occur in the southern watershed, simply stated.
So anywhere in
How
the
we-
southern watershed,
How we get
could-
to that, right.
And we could get those
6%
credits.
of the city that's southern.
The idea was this was going to have to be built anyway, and by purchasing it at $1.50 a square foot, we would net those water credits. 10A has to be built as part of phase one, so it was kind of a win-win in that respect. Yes, we can go someplace else and buy the land and build a BMP, but this was going to be there anyway.
It's additive to a stormwater system that helps 299 families. It's part of a system. There's some synergy in doing it here as opposed to just creating BMPs on the peripheral of a road project.
If we do this deal with the developer, make clear to me what our ongoing responsibility is after that.
Well, as in any subdivision, all of the stormwater infrastructure and the utilities and the roads eventually are turned over to the city for long-term operation and maintenance. We end up owning that. At this point, the way we handle BMPs is they remain the property of the homeowners association, and the homeowners association has to maintain them. Part of this agreement was going to be a third agreement with the homeowners association that they would take up the maintaining of the BMP. And I'm talking about the cutting the grass and the stuff that relates to aesthetics. We have easements on all the other BMPs, and when they do fill up, we have to come in and dredge them for stormwater performance. But we wouldn't dredge them for aesthetics or recreational purposes. And we had a part of this whole package was it will be an agreement with the homeowner association that they agree to take this on for the same responsibility that they're taking on all the other BMPs.
Okay, but in regards to the additional density on the overall development, if we do this deal, what is our obligation in that regard?
Well, we would have to complete phase one when the 98 or 116, whatever the case may be, units develop. Eventually, all those roads and that stormwater pipes and the inlets and the water and sewer lines are all turned over to the city, and that becomes our responsibility to maintain, as we have done with every subdivision.
I'm more concerned with the stormwater facilities that are going to have to be put in for the balance of the development. What's our responsibility in that?
So if you're talking about phase two, most of phase two is actually pipe work in villages A and B. And there's some, it's not all, some of it is there's some additional work, there's some additional canal work and additional BMPs if villages D and E ever develop. But most of the additional work in phase two was actually work in villages A and B. We would be expanding pipe diameters, expanding the number of inlets or the size of inlets. Not a whole lot different than what we'll be doing in Windsor Woods, where we're going to go in and add more street inlets and bigger pipes so that the water can clear the streets faster.
But can't we require the developer to do that in C and D?
In C, and yes, going forward, trust me, there'll be a lot more scrutiny put on the infrastructure, especially the stormwater infrastructure in C, D, and E than there was in A and B 15 years ago. But so there will be more of that. But in A and B that are already built, that we already own, the city is already the owner of the stormwater system in A and B, and much of the subsequent phase, the cost is pipe work in villages A and B.
Okay, John.
I'm just trying to get my head around, I mean, it's kind of spinning a little bit here. So for the next phase, for the homes that have not been built and have not been permitted today, they're going to have to engineer and prove that they can, according to the new regs, that they're going to have to handle all of their stormwater needs on site. Is that correct?
Okay, this thing about handling stormwater on site, state regulations require some containment for the 1 and 10-year storm. We're designing a system to handle the 100-year storm.
So they have no responsibility for handling the 100-year storm.
Well,
go ahead and they could get, by right, go ahead and build the same disaster that we're currently dealing with the homes that are.
The state regulations don't require any containment for the 100-year storm. That's where the city gets in, and we try to make sure that the stormwater system will function during a 100-year storm.
I'm not trying to make an argument for anybody. I'm trying to understand myself. So, but by right, the developer could go in, and as long as they can handle a 10-year storm, then we would have to permit it.
No.
And the rest of that
No,
okay.
no,
Well,
not exactly.
That's kind of the question I'm getting to. So the developer is going to be responsible for handling all of the engineering and the construction.
They have to have an approved stormwater plan.
To handle how much stormwater? 100-year storm?
I think the standard is 10-year for on-site.
According to the state regulations,
You're not operating at a 10-year.
I mean, or, is it going to be our responsibility to handle the stuff over a 10? And we're kind of stuck with that. I'm just asking.
Stuck with that all over the city.
I'm trying to get. I was trying to get at too, John.
We don't.
Yeah, I was going to bring this in the next couple of weeks. Excuse me.
Go ahead, Tom.
State regulations, when they say contain, all that means is they hold the peak down to the pre-development peak. There's still more water. You develop property, there's more water. That peak, we may be able to, in the 1 and 10-year storm, maintain this to the peak that was the pre-development peak, but that peak will be stretched out longer. All the water is still going to leave the site, and more of it will leave the site when it's developed. your development regulations say that they cannot get their plans approved unless their stormwater system meets the satisfaction of planning and the Department of Public Works. And so we would not approve their plans until the infrastructure was right.
What I'm struggling with is, I certainly understand that it would be great to have cost participation. I understand it would be great to have a landowner that was friendly in terms of helping with the overall design and the land needs that we're going to need to actually get the water out of there. And I'm recognizing that this council has committed that we're going to solve the problems for Asheville Park, the homes that are built there. My concerns is that we know that it is going to be a challenge to have the new development of this area drained properly. And if we go in and cost participate, does that mean that we're kind of accepting to be a partner in fixing these unknown issues?
Yes.
And that's
We're ratifying that plan.
I mean, that's. Am I oversimplifying it, or?
I think that's very accurate.
Very accurate.
All right, thank you.
Well, I'll wrap this up pretty quickly. There are, there are some protections.
No, only the zoning is approved. The construction plans are not approved. So just because you have zoning, that means you have a max allowable density. That doesn't mean you can attain that max allowable
I have one
density.
question, and then we're gonna let Tom finish, because we got other things we gotta do here tonight. But, Tom, the state code requires up to 10 years, right? And up to.
They need to manage the 1-year storm and the 10-year storm.
1-year
for
storm,
making sure the peaks do not exceed pre-development
Does that
peaks.
code prohibit us from requiring them to design for a 100-year storm?
No.
It doesn't?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Let's finish, and then we got to go on to some other.
So there are a couple of protections. They wouldn't get building permits until they had substantially completed the BMPs that are on the Village C area, and no certificate of occupancy until essentially their on-site work was essentially complete. They could not use existing BMPs for storing sediment. And they, if they want to use any of the new BMPs to store construction sediment, they have to over-excavate and then give us a survey afterwards to prove that the storage volume is there. This is pretty much boilerplate for most subdivisions today. There's how the costs break down. That's in the memo.
How the work items break down.
Pardon?
The cost, the work item.
Those are the costs. The on-site work by the city, the off-site work by the city, the on-site work by the developer. And you can see it adds up to the 11.1 million. So our recommendations was that we would move forward with the CPA. Staff still believes that's the best solution for the city, the developer, and the neighborhood. But again, obviously, council here will make those decisions. We're already moving forward with the gated control structure in Weir. You have a CIP that you've approved for this project. We are moving forward unless Mr. Hanson or 6 of you were to tell us not to. We're moving forward with phase 1 regardless of what happens in your council decisions.
And we are able to move forward with these components because this is on us anyway.
We'll move forward with these, but we would move forward with the entire thing to the extent we're
You
able.
don't have $11 million.
Pardon?
You have $11 million?
Over the next 2 years.
Okay.
But this
What you
part
need.
that the city is
I'll find it.
responsible for building, it's out for bid, we're ready to begin, and you expect this to be completed this fall.
The only thing that's out for bid right now is the weir. We haven't finished designing the pump station or put that out to bid, or the work at Sandbridge, Newbridge Road, but we would move forward immediately.
And the completion time should be later this year. I think I've read somewhere that you said before hurricane season.
Well, that was certainly the goal. It hadn't worked out that way. We're looking at a notice to proceed on the weir for July, and probably, at least the contractor has a time that he could take till January. Now, he might finish it earlier. but given the amount of time we had to allot him,
In months, anyway.
hopefully.
And that includes the Sandbridge intersection and that new.
No, the work that is ready to be awarded next month is just the weir, the bigger weir.
But I mean, what
We would
about this intersection part?
we would immediately go, we're going forward. We have a 30% design. We would move forward on the pump station and the Sandbridge Road, Newbridge Road intersection improvements, and the rest of it to the extent that the funding is available. It's spread over 2 years right now.
We'll work on that.
What else you got?
Wasn't that enough?
Quite a bit, yeah. Thank you, Tom.
We're going to take 5 minutes. Tom Nicholas is going to jump up here, and we're going, because you do have an agenda item on reappropriating dollars to support the award of the Virginia Aquarium Marine Animal Care Center. And so if we can bring that up, Tony. If we didn't lose Tom Nicholas. All right, we got Rick, we got the engineers here, and 5 minutes or less, Thomas.
5 minutes or less, aye.
Great.
Ritchie Kerbo Construction was low at 13,389, still about 1.5 over the engineer's estimate. Quickly admitted they had an error in their bid, notified purchasing, and purchasing were able to relieve them from participating in the competition, making MEB General Contractors the low bid at 14,067. We did what we are allowed to do. We held negotiations with MEB with the objective of trying to get down to 11.8. We identified these items in negotiations with them to reduce their bid by $284,000, again, not bringing us close to 11.8. So at this point, we have a MEB General Contractor's original bid of $14,067,000. We have value engineered out $284,326 worth of items, bringing their bid to $13,700. We also have a requirement on this project for the cost to bring Next Generation Network from up Bells Road. There were a number of projects that fell in the gap. They were existing before Next Generation Network was funded, and they weren't new enough for us to be putting the Next Generation Network funding in the project. So this was one of them that was, so we were going to have to come up with that from some source. So in order to cover that, we would totally need $13,900,000. We have 11.8 as our estimate for construction, meaning to go ahead and award and keep the other costs as they are, we would need $2,106,000 balance to complete. How could we do that? So in the spring of, the very early spring of 2016, when we were opening bids on the Housing Resource Center, we were in a very, very favorable bid climate. We actually, I believe, awarded that construction contract for about $19 million. As that project has progressed, we've had extremely good relationship with the construction contractor. Things have gone very well. There haven't been a lot of change orders. We currently have $3,881,000 in funds available from that $26 million. With about 1.3 is all we need to complete that project and finish out the end things that need to be awarded. So we have potentially $2.5 million in funds from Housing Resource Center that could be redirected to the Marine Animal Care Center.
Excuse me, who's the contractor on that?
On which?
On the Housing Resource Center that.
SB Ballard.
Okay.
Our recommendation that we're bringing to you is to transfer $2,106,000 from the Housing Resource Center to the Marine Animal Care Center. Really what we're doing is we're taking money that came to us in a very favorable bid climate 2 years ago and bringing it forward to a time when the bid climate isn't so favorable to cover the costs of both of these projects.
So we're using savings on the resource center.
We are using savings on the Resource Center to cover our cost overrun in the Marine Animal Care Center.
Yes, John.
This is always an observation of mine. We just approved the budget on May 12th. Or May 15th, what that Tuesday was? I'd like to know, did we know on May 12th that we had the award and the contingency? I'm just trying to understand when we get the budget and review the projects. If we had $2.6 million or $2.5 million that was available for reapplication to CIP, then we obviously the budget should reveal that to us when we're having a discussion.
We didn't know two things, sir. What we didn't know, we were in negotiations, just starting negotiations with MEB, and so we didn't know how far down we were going to be able to bring their number, whether we were going to get the Hoyt 11.8.
I'm not referring to your project. I'm referring to knowing that there was an asset available because of a project, thank goodness, that was coming in well, great to the builder, but that asset availability is not visible. Now, if we learned that after we adopted the budget, which is hard to believe given the price, but we just need to make sure that when we're doing these budget reviews, that these assets that are available are highlighted when we're adopting the budget, not after it's adopted. This is still legitimate. I think you did a great job, and we got to fund this. I'm just pointing out, too, there's a flaw in our understanding of the budget when these assets are not highlighted before we vote on the budget.
Sir.
Can I just make a quick comment?
I'm sorry.
Can I make a quick comment?
Sure.
Dave, I hope we keep track of the contractors that come in under budget. I think that we should be making a list, and the contractors that come in under budget should be on that list.
I wish that the state's Procurement Act had best value and like the federal government allows you to do, and we would be in a good shape. But as long as it's low bid, we do keep track, we do take after action reports, and we do score our contractors, and we know where they are. And should the state ever wake up and pass laws that gives best value to the taxpayer so that you can get credit for good performers and timely performers, then in fact, those scores and those things, Mr. Davenport, will take great meaning in performance.
They all get recognition for
Yes, sir.
coming in under budget.
We will. He's doing a great job in the HRC.
The bottom line, we have the money because we saved money on the resource
Check. Yes,
center. And you're asking to use that money on this project. And that's what it comes down to.
That's all it is. Okay, sir.
Thank you very much.
Under 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. That's all you have, right? City Council comments. Anybody have comments? Yep. Yes, Ben.
Today, I had the honor of being at Pastor Y.D. Thorogood's funeral for the New Jerusalem Church of God in Christ. This is the third pastor that they have lost in 4 years. From the Thorogood family, and so I delivered a proclamation in your honor, Mayor Jones. June 18th, 2018 will forever be known as Pastor Y.D. Thorogood Day in Virginia Beach.
Great. All right. Anybody else? John?
Just based on the city manager's comment, I know that's coming around here in August, it started in August, but I think that would be a very good legislative proposal to put together, and I certainly will work with some legislators to actually request them to make that modification. That makes a lot of sense to me. That's a very good insight.
Thank you.
Mayor Jones, one other thing.
Yes.
Today is Juneteenth Day, which is the day that commemorates the end of slavery in the United States, and so would just like to recognize Juneteenth Day.
Thank you. All right.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
yesterday I attended the state, the Broadband Advisory Council meeting that I was appointed to by the governor, and I will tell you, across the state, they are really buzzing about our underwater sea cables that are coming in here to Virginia Beach and how it's going to really affect business across the state. So people are really excited about what we're doing.
Well, even after a 10-hour drive, you made it to the Development Authority
I
meeting
did.
this morning.
600 miles I drove yesterday. That's real dedication.
Yeah. All right, anybody else?
I have one more thing.
Yes,
if I
John.
could. July the 10th, I know you're voting on the Sports Center. I will be at Boy Scout camp. I'm going to do my best to get here, but I will call you. I would hope that if I'm en route, that you might delay that vote till I arrive. But I'll let you know how close I am.
What day is that?
July the 10th.
10th.
I'll be at Boy Scout, up at Camp Pipsico, so I should be able to make it, but I'm going, wasting time, but I just let you know that I will be arriving just for that vote, and then I'll have to get back to camp, so I will not be here on July 10th, except for that vote.
All right, now we'll review the agenda, if we
Okay.
can. Mr. Vice
Under
Mayor.
ordinance and resolution, does anybody have any comments?
Yes, Barbara.
I would like to do something with this cost participation agreement so that if we are going to hear it
Is that
tonight, at
item
least
5?
after the planning item, or better yet, it would be, I think, good to move to another agenda. But
We've got speakers already on that one. So,
Do you have speakers on any other ones?
we've got speakers on item 5 and on planning items J1 and J3.
I want to vote no on item 4.
Which item 4?
We adopt the city guidelines for PPPA, because I'm not really in favor of issuing debt outside the
Okay.
charter. And I want to pull item 7, but you can vote on it as one block motion, but I do want that to be an itemized vote, and I am voting no.
For pulling 7?
Yep.
Okay.
Anybody else under ordinances, resolutions?
I'm sorry, did you say you wanted to pull it?
I wanted to pull it, but rather than requiring a vote by dividing the question, which I could do, I'm willing to accept the motion in block and just vote no on all items A, B, C, D, and E in block, rather than different votes.
So we'll hear that one. Okay.
Is
Under
there speakers?
No, not as of a few minutes ago. Okay, under planning, item J1, HOFD, Asheville Park, we've got speakers on that one. Item J2, City of Virginia Beach, Ray Borough, Pittsfield, 560 Oceana Boulevard, Beach District.
My only concern there is that I think I passed this on to Tom, that when we do the water quality results, that we will share those with the property owners.
And we did add a condition based on your comments
Okay.
at the briefing and the planning commission that'll require a baseline water quality test and then also annual water quality monitor.
Is that condition in the agenda?
Yes, sir.
So
Number
it's in the agenda now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we got it.
What are you doing with J2?
Consent.
Consent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Item J3, Northampton Development LLC, we've got speakers on that one. This one here.
Yeah.
Item J4, BHC LLC, Christine Joe Harrett, Bayside, okay. Item 5, Beach Building Group, McHugh Builders LLC, for 521, 523 20th Street. John?
No issues.
Jim, I'll be abstaining on item number 5.
Okay, item 6, Gina Arney, Barbara Arney, and Kenneth T. Barefoot, Ray Daycare Center, 600 Iris Lane, Bayside.
Fine.
Number 7, Virginia Finishing LLC, Spring Building LLC, Automobile Repair Garage, 4990 Euclid Road, Bayside.
Fine.
It's all about Bayside. 8, Savernus Beauty Spa, Eglin Associates LP for a tattoo parlor, Beach District.
No issues with that, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Valvoline LLC, AH Sandbridge LLC, Automobile Repair Garage at Western Out Parcel 2105 Princess Anne Road, Princess Anne District. Hall Properties LLC, GOPA 2 LLC, conditional use permit from Automobile Repair Garage, 4300 Virginia Beach Boulevard, 417 Thalia Road, Lynn Haven. I'm okay with that. All right. Resolution authorized 3 roadside guide signs within the Central Business Core District, Ray Ziders, American Dream Theater, Bayside.
Fine.
And that's it.
All right. I'll call the formal session to order, or the informal session to order. And The chair will entertain a motion to recess into closed session pursuant to the exemptions from open meetings allowed by Section 2.2-3711A Code of Virginia as amended for the following purposes: publicly held property, discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for public purpose, or of the disposition of publicly held property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A3, Princess Anne District. Public contract, discussion of the award of a public contract involving the expenditure of public funds and discussion of the terms or scope of such contract where discussion in an open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A29, Virginia Beach Community Development Corporation. Legal matters, consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members or consultants pertaining to actual or probable litigation where such consultation or briefing in an open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body in consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A7, Estate of India Kager versus Ferreira et al., an internal EEO investigation. Personnel matters, discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of any public body pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A1. May I have a motion?
Second.
Call the roll, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Moore? Aye. Mr. Dyer?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Mr. Davenport?
Aye.
Mr. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. James Jackson? Mr. Arnold?
Aye.
Mr. Wilson? Aye. Vice Mayor Wood?
Aye.
Aye. All right.